A friend of mine took down a dead tree on his property, and as they were cutting down the tree, he asked me if I wanted a tree slab. I said yes, so he gave me 2 of these tree slabs, which have been sitting in my basement for the last 4 years, I want to say. I always wanted to do something with it, but the time never materialized until now. So I'm going to bring the camera in a little closer, kind of capture what's going on with this piece. So when I got the slab, I didn't know how to properly store it, so I just left it out in the open without actually sealing it properly. So as you can see, there's a big checking right here. So this is a very nice elm. There's still bark attached to it. So whatever I plan to do doesn't involve bark being on the cookie slab. So let's start by removing the bark first. So since it's cracked in the middle anyway, I've decided to split this piece into 2. This slab is about 40 pounds. It's really heavy. The only tool in my shop to do it safely is the bandsaw. So I put my Timberwolf resaw blade and started freehand cutting by splitting it in the middle. Other than the parts that are already cracked, it's a very clean cut. So I put some pencil mark on 1/2 and then ran it through the jointer. I'm surprised that my jointer was able to handle this, as this slab was really heavy. Then I attached the magnetic fence on the bandsaw and used the jointed side as the reference to cut slabs about 2 inches thick. After some productive resawing, I chose some slabs and decided to make an end grain cutting board with them. The process is take them to the jointer, surface one side, and run them through the planer, surface the other side. The shavings were really long and it was clogging up my tool, but I was able to get it done. I didn't want to run the end grain through the jointer as it risks splitting, so I used my track saw, one side clean, and ran the other side through the table saw to get parallel. I made the cut in 2 passes to get a very clean cut and not risk burning the wood.
If you're enjoying this video so far, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit that thumbs up button to like this video.
And finally squared up the edges at the miter saw. After that, I took about 1.25 inch cut to expose the end grain. I probably should have made this cut in 2 passes. As you see, there is some burning. And then onto the glue up. I oriented the pieces to get the grain pattern that I thought looked okay, and then used Tight Bond 3 with a glue roller. I put glue on both sides and then gently applied clamping pressure from the sides, and then put another clamp from the top, and then I also put some cawls to get the board level on both ends and the middle.
Here it is, all clamped up. Once the glue dried, I removed all the clamps and cleaned up the glue squeeze out with a chisel. There's some debate whether you can run an end grain board through a planer. We'll find out in a second. Spoiler alert, it works. I know it works because I've done this a few times in the past. The key is to take very light passes. This is a real-time video, so you can see I'm only increasing the depth ever so slightly. If you feel nervous, you can definitely glue up a long grain piece at the end so there isn't any cracking or checking, but it's not necessary. Also, my planer is very basic. It's the Ven 12.5 inches planer, which is really basic by all measures. So you don't need any fancy planer to do this either. And that's the board after planing. I break out my crosscut sled and square up both ends, as I had left some excess to clean it up in the end. And then on to sanding. I started with a 120 grit sandpaper. After the initial sanding, I sprayed some water onto the board to raise the grains and then wiped it off with a rag. This is a very essential step because without it, the first time you wash the board gets very hazy and loses its smooth finish. Sanding round 2 with a 240 grit and then hand sanding with a 320 grit sandpaper. I added a round over to the top of the cutting board and a chamfer to the bottom of the cutting board to make it comfortable to hold and work with. Once the top and bottom sides are profiled, I lift the board up vertically to round over the corners. This way I don't have to worry about chip out or tear out because the top and bottom sides are already profiled. I never feel comfortable rounding over a corner with a handled router, so a router table is probably the safe bet to do this. Finally, I added 2 juice screws to the top of the table. There was some burning, but nothing a light sanding can't handle. I clean out the burn marks with a sanding pad and the final prep with a card scraper. I drill holes for the rubber feet and secure the rubber feet by hand. The final step before applying the finish is to put my seal on the cutting board. On to applying finish, I use the mineral oil as my initial coat. I pour a generous amount and rub it in by hand to get it into the end grain. The end grain is very thirsty at this moment, so it'll soak up the oil as soon as you pour it. So keep pouring it until it starts to pool on top of the surface. That's when you know that the board is saturated. After 2 coats of mineral oil, I add this butcher block compound, which I believe is a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. This creates a final protective coat for the board. And here are some pictures of the completed cutting board. Thank you for watching.